Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of the A1 Autobody podcast. Today I have on Mike Switzer from Form Function Wood. Form Function Wood is an awesome company that makes beautiful custom shift knobs. I get to talk to Mike about how he got started in the industry, his creative process, his experimentation process, where he sees himself going, and also his neat and kind of rare, cool little car. I hope you guys enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed recording it. And I'd love to hear what you think at the end. If you want to shoot me a DM or, leave a comment, I'd love to know what you guys think about how everything's going with the podcast. Without further ado, here's Mike. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Pretty good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing very good. For anyone who doesn't know, your name is Mike. This is the first time I've ever pronounced it, so bear with me. Mike Switzer.
Yeah, we'll go with the long eye.
Better known as by your Instagram handle, Form Function Wood. And you make shift knobs and brake handles, e-brake handles, and pens too. So a whole wide array of things. But I think you're probably most known for your shifter knobs and your e-brake handles.
Yep, you got that.
So how did you start? How did you get into making those?
Well, for most of my working life, I've said I don't ever want to be a boss. I don't want to deal with paperwork. I don't want to chase around and deal with people. I just want to work for somebody and do my thing. And then I turned 35 and I said, no, working for somebody else sucks. So what can I do? And it kind of started out as a hobby thing for the most part. I was like, well, I don't know, let's get a lathe and see if I can actually make something. And bought a $100 lathe, which I thought was a screaming deal at the time, and later turned out that that's probably what it cost him brand new without any broken parts, and I bought it with broken parts. But threw a piece of walnut on it and turned out a shift knob, and I guess the rest is kind of history.
Was your plan to make a shift knob, or is that just kind of what it turned into?
It was. I had done a little bit of toying around with things that I could do. I actually spent a little bit of time making wooden games like giant Jenga and giant dice, stuff like that. And it took a really long time to make anything, and against a market where you can buy those things for under $100 easily. And I was spending way more than that just in time, much less product. So I thought, what can I do that's going to be time efficient and eventually lucrative? It's not super lucrative now, but it'll get there. And so I thought, I'm into cars. I've always been into cars, and I'm kind of sick and tired of the run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter shift knobs. I wonder if I can make a shift knob. And so I did.
So before you had gotten the lathe,
were
you into woodworking before that, or was this like just kind of let's pick up a lathe and see what happens kind of thing?
Well, I kind of got it from my dad, who has always been one hell of a carpenter. He built toys for us when we were a kid. He's built his own kitchen cabinets and does his own flooring. He is truly a master of all trades. And I'm just kind of trailing along going, maybe I can do those kinds of things. And so before the lathe, I was trying to do the wooden toys, the Jenga and the dice and stuff like that. And that was just, basically needed a table saw. So.
And so your dad has been doing this. Has he been able to help you? Has your dad been able to give you advice and kind of guide you along, or is this kind of your own thing that he can't really help you with?
So my dad's really cool in that respect. He really likes to assist and challenge at the same time. So he has a garage chock full of tools that I am more than welcome to come over and use. But the first time through, he'll kind of point the general direction, but not really hand it to me and let me kind of figure it out. And then as we go along, he'll help me refine things. And the toys and stuff like that, he was really constructive for, but I don't know if he's ever spent time on a lathe before. So the shift knobs were kind of my own thing.
Working with I don't know how much you know about me in the shop, but we're a family-run shop, so it's me, my dad, my brother, and then we have some other guys working for us. And working for my dad, it sounds like it's very similar. So I remember, for instance, when I started welding, the first time I ever welded, I came in and he had said he was going to teach me how to weld. So I came in and he showed me the welder and he showed me a giant pile of metal and he said, "Have fun." So that was his kind of introduction. He showed me kind of roughly how to use the the taps and the knobs and stuff, but really it was pretty much just, "I'll be over here if you have any questions, but good luck." So it sounds like your dad's kind of a similar guy.
Yep.
So obviously you're working around a lathe, which is actually, for anybody who doesn't know, why don't you just give a quick description of what a lathe is exactly?
Well, basically what it is a motor and a belt and a head with some bearings in it that has multiple different ways of putting a piece of wood in it, and then spins up the piece of wood. So it spins horizontally in front of you. You've got a rest on that, which is where your tooling goes. Set the tool on the rest and work your way into the wood with the tool. And as it spins, you work up and down that piece of wood to create whatever shape you're looking for.
And what kind of tools when you say tooling, what kind of tools do you use in conjunction with the lathe?
So I'm just using some pretty basic hand tools. It's just basically a long wooden shaft with a long piece of metal out of the end of it with a sharp bit. There's all kinds of different shapes for those bits that you can use. I typically end up using a round head or a diamond shaped head. The round ones are pretty good for the big bulky work where you're taking off the edges and looking for the basic shape. And then the diamond headed tool is much more precise. You can use that to really create the little edges and little details and stuff like that. With the shift knobs, for the most part, I'm pretty much just using the round headed tool because there's not a lot of little detail work. Shift knobs are, if I have to be frank, they're pretty basic shapes. So not a lot of crazy little details.
So I think, at least looking at your work, I think it's interesting that you say they're basic, basic shapes, but you've been able to do so much with them. All of your work is, really pretty awesome to look at. Where do you get the ideas and the inspiration for different knobs or whatever?
Sure. So some of it comes from the customers. They've already been on the internet and shopping, and they've found their cookie cutter generic but twice as expensive something from somebody else, and they've come across me and said, "Hey, what would it cost to do something truly unique, but I really like this shape?" And so I can work from that. Sometimes I'll have a shape in mind. For instance, I really got started in the Miata scene. I have a little Miata here at the house, and some of them, when they came out, they actually had wooden shift knobs and e-brake handles. And so I thought, it'd be really cool if I could recreate those so that people who didn't have them anymore or they didn't come equipped with them, they could buy something from me that was similar. And so that was kind of my inspiration. And then sometimes I'll put a piece of wood on the lathe and I'll stare at it and I'll start cutting into it and I'll just kind of let the wood talk to me. Every now and again it does that. Whatever it seems to feel like doing, I'll do that.
And you don't only work with wood, you also work with
I want to say it's composite or
acrylic. So I've got a couple of
acrylic.
different acrylics that I work with. A standard, and I can't remember the technical name now for it, but it's your standard hard plastic acrylic. It gets you a lot of the really basic patterns, so a lot of blue with a ribbon of white through it, stuff like that. And then the stuff that's just been insanely popular here lately is called Enlace Acryl Ester. And that is best way to describe it. Kind of like space in a piece of plastic. Depending on the colors and such that they mix into it, it's much more freeform. So when they're creating the blanks, they will take a cup of blue and a cup of black and a cup of silver, and they pour it into the mold, and then they kind of swirl it around just a little bit, and it creates really, really fantastic patterns and shapes. And so they've been really, really popular here lately. I've almost thought that maybe I should have called the company Form Function Acrylic.
So do you make your own acrylic like blocks, or do you order those?
So far I am ordering them. I just got through with my first year of business in 2018. 2019 is kind of my 2018 was my proof of concept. 2019 is my let's turn this into something. And part of let's turn this into something is going to be getting the equipment that I need to do everything in-house, which will also include making the acrylic and acryl ester pieces myself.
That's awesome. So this year you're really hoping to expand your operation then?
Yeah. This year I thoroughly intend to turn it into, I guess, what I would call a genuine business. It's been mildly lucrative and extremely fun and really kind of a hobby for the last year. I'm still working a full-time 7 to 4 o'clock job. It's definitely very interesting. Keeps me busy.
So you're hoping to start doing all that in-house and really expand your operation this year?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that because I get a lot of people who will say, man, I've really got this vision and it's got this color of pink and this color of blue and this color of green. I don't know, for example. And, can you do that? And it's like, well, I can see if somebody else already has. And so far I've been really lucky, and there have been good options, maybe not exactly what the customer was thinking, but fairly close. But ultimately I want to be able to provide exactly what the customer's vision is, and to do that I've got to do it myself.
I've also seen you do some really cool things with wood and acrylic actually mixed together. How do you get that effect?
Patience. No, it's you kind of have to really imagine the piece long before you get started. For instance, right now I'm actually finally working on a piece for me personally, using African blackwood, which, as far as my wood products go, the African blackwood is far and beyond the most popular and very, very beautiful. And I'm mixing that with an acryl ester product that's called Yellow Damascus, and it's yellows, blacks, and silvers all kind of swirled together. And I have a pretty fancy 29-cent table jig that I made for my table saw that allows me to cut really narrow slices and pieces and not lose fingers. And
always important when you want to stay in business.
Yes, yeah, fingers are kind of important for this stuff. And then I went through some pretty tough learning curves with getting everything to go together. Initially, I thought, because I had already done some work putting different kinds of wood together, but I had never put together different mediums, so wood and metal or wood and acrylic. So I thought, well, I have this really expensive wood glue that takes all the abuse I can throw at it and stays together, so I'll try and put this together with wood glue. And the very first piece that I tried to do, I got about 3/4 of the way through, and then it turned back into its rudimentary pieces.
Deconstructed
It very
itself.
much deconstructed itself. And so just time and research and trial and error, and I've got it locked down now with a product that really seems to hold everything together really well and has allowed me to turn out some really unique stuff.
Do you mind if I ask what that is?
It's just super glue.
Tricky. Very tricky.
Yeah, it is a fancy, expensive super glue. It actually has some flex to it, which most super glues are very brittle. And that flex is what allows it to be successful.
Most super glues are water soluble. Is the one that you use?
It
also?
is not.
Does it have is it like a 2-part hardener super glue?
Nope. So it is a cyanoacrylate based super glue. I don't know exactly what all they do with it. I don't know if you're at all familiar with the world of super glues, but a company
doesn't sound like I'm nearly as well versed in them as you are.
I'm learning. A company called Starbond. I've been noticing them a lot as I got into woodworking and started following woodworking pages in general. They started to pop up a lot. And they did a giveaway that if you liked their page and tagged 3 people and this and that, you had a chance to win some free stuff from them. And I got picked. And so I got to try their Flex super glue for free. And so it's worked well, and I'll keep buying from them.
Keep buying from them until someone else gives you something for
That's
free,
right?
It sounds like you're trying a lot of different things. How do you keep a balance between doing the things that you can do and you're good at, and trying out new things and experimenting with what you can do?
Yeah, that has gotten trickier as time has progressed. Initially, when I started, it was go on Facebook pages and beg and plead for attention, and go on Instagram and beg and plead for attention, and pull a job here and pull a job there. And, I would only have maybe 1 or 2 pieces ever working at a time, which was a blessing at that time because it allowed me a lot of time to do a lot of this trial and error stuff in the background. As I'm discovering here as of late, I may have created a snowball that I'm not going to be able to stop. But I very, very gratefully have found myself extremely busy with custom orders. And so now it's really, in order to do that really important R&D stuff, I do have to stop on the customer orders long enough to try the new thing and see if it works, and then come back to the lineup. And it's a juggle, it's a balancing act, but one day at a time. And so far nobody's called me up and said give me my money back, so
Have any customers contacted you and said, do you think you could do this? And you don't really know, but you say you can just to get the opportunity to give it a try?
Oh my goodness, yes. I don't know how deep you've gone through my Instagram, and I think I put more of that on my Facebook page. But I did a piece of African blackwood with some aluminum bands in it. The customer, really, really phenomenal guy. I'm actually pretty much become friends with him at this point. I was trying to get him to go with the blackwood and acrylic. I know I can do the acrylic. I know it's going to turn out awesome. He said, yeah, but it'll never have the same effect as doing the aluminum in there. I said, well, I don't have a metal lathe. I don't have metal tools. I said, I'll try,
right,
but I can't promise that anything is going to work out. And he said, go ahead, give it a shot. And I ended up putting that particular piece. I did both a shift knob and an e-brake handle for him in that pattern. And I ended up putting both of them back together 4 or 5 times separately. The real struggle with wood and aluminum is the difference at which they heat soak and expand as you're working with them. So during the lathe process, it's not really a big deal. Things aren't really moving fast enough to create a great deal of heat. But I have to drill the pieces out in order to, especially the e-brake handles, which I have to drill all the way through from one end to the other. And in the process of doing that, things get hot. Even working slow, the bit gets hot, the wood gets hot, the metal gets hot. It ended up splitting that e-brake handle. It was 3 strips of aluminum. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6 different surfaces that were glued together, and every single one of them failed once. And so I ended up actually drilling and inserting a steel dowel along the length of the piece the last time that it came apart, so that at the very least, if it came apart, it couldn't rotate on its own axis. It couldn't rotate away from where it was set. And it did split one more time, but I was able to push it back together on those dowels and maintain the integrity of the piece. So,
wow, that's really cool. So that's like, I mean, how long did something like that take you to like work out?
So typically from start to finish on your average shift knob, the longest time wasted is waiting on the 2-part epoxy that makes the gloss finish. That's very time consuming. It's not especially difficult. It doesn't take a lot of my time standing in front of it, but it takes a long time for it to set up and finish. But a typical piece will run about 2 weeks to actually produce from start to finish. I spent somewhere closer to almost 2 months working on that piece.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was your first foray into wood and
Yeah,
metal?
it was, and possibly my last.
Oh, so you haven't done any wood and metal since then?
No, I do have a very close friend, the guy I actually bought the Miata from, has requested that I sponsor him, and I have taken him on. And so, of course, since he doesn't have to pay for anything, he wants black wood and aluminum.
Of course, right?
So I will oblige him. I will make it happen. And, through trial and error, I've learned a lot. So I'm hopeful that this time around it'll go a lot more efficiently.
I'm no expert at all at this, obviously. But I'm curious, how come you can't maybe like drill the pieces separately and then assemble them?
Yeah, and so that's something that I definitely learned from the first attempt. Like I say, after it had failed a number of times, I went ahead and did dowel it. The biggest thing that's tricky with doweling ahead of time is, whilst you can approximate where everything is going to end up, the tolerances are pretty tight between the outside diameter and the inside diameter of a finished piece. And for me to dowel that, I would have to know precisely where those were before they ever went on the lathe and got turned. So
Gotcha.
It's definitely like a shift knob would be much more simple in that respect. The tolerances are much wider and much more forgiving. The e-brake handle, though, is definitely much more mathematical to figure that out.
Like I said, I'm definitely not an expert. It's just something I'm sure that you had thought of and tried many times, but it's just, if I was listening to this and someone had said what you just said, I would have immediately thought in my head, why didn't he do that? So I just wanted to close that.
Yeah.
I was thinking that.
Yeah, my hope was that it would all just hold together like everything else I had ever done before it. I had no concept in my head of what the difference is between the heats and the two different materials was going to cause, because the wood and the acrylic are pretty complementary. They don't cause me a lot of problems, but the metal heats up so fast.
Yeah, that's not something the heat changing was not something I would have ever even remotely thought of, and I work with and drill metal all the time. It's just I never would have even considered that when I was doing it. So.
And that's why I didn't pre-dowel.
I probably would have broke it and not even realized why I broke it. So you're obviously working around something. How fast does your lathe spin exactly?
Well, let's see here. There's a handy dandy diagram inside the head here that I've Haven't looked in ages. So it's got about 6 different steps, but it'll spin everywhere from 430 RPM all the way up to 3,900 RPM.
Jesus. So when you're working with something that's spinning like that, you know, and not only that, but you're poking sharp sticks into it, is there any, what's the kind of stuff that you see go wrong when you're doing
that? Some really fantastic things can go wrong really fast. So this year for Christmas, I got this idea in my head that I was going to make my wife a jewelry box on the lathe. Now, keep in mind, I have always done outside diameter stuff. Shift knobs, I'm always working on the outside, and anything that needs to be done internally is just done with drill bits. There's no technicality to it, really. You just run the drill bit through it. So I thought, I'll grab this. I found this really gorgeous piece of cherry. I'll section it into 3 different sections, and I'll turn each one into a bowl, and they'll stack one on top of the other, and it'll just make this really stunning, really gorgeous, I don't know, junk box, jewelry box, whatever she might want to do with it. And got it on the lathe. It was, I'll start from the beginning. I typically work with pieces of wood that are no more than 2 inches by about 7 or 8 inches long for the longest ones. This piece of cherry was 4 inches square by 8 inches long. I did everything I needed to do. I made sure everything was pretty well centered, and I turned the lathe on slow, and it seemed like it was turning nice. The lathe that I have, you actually have to stop the lathe and adjust the belt manually to turn the speed up and down. And so I went from really slow to working speed, which is really fast. And I heard the little motor wind up, and that 4x8 chunk of cherry sort of started to wobble the lathe across the table. Made some really horrific noises. It was at that point that I figured out how to actually strap the lathe down. I'd never had to do that before. So that was exciting. And then I get it all down to round. It looks really nice. I get the lid sectioned off and get that pretty well dressed up. Get it cut into its 3 individual cylinders. I'm feeling really good at this point.
That's always when things go wrong.
Absolutely right. I throw the bottom section on the lathe, spin it up, and I'm attempting my first ever internal work. I've never worked internal on something before, and I'm trying to create a bowl. And so I'm using every tool at my disposal. I'm trying all kinds of different things, seeing how it works, seeing how it feels. And I've got this first bowl down to 90%. I mean, we're talking probably 2, maybe 3 more passes across the bottom of the bowl, and this puppy's done. I'm getting real excited. I'm getting anxious. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. And so at this point, I'm using my diamond head because it's easier to work the inside of this thing with the diamond head just because of space constraints. And as I'm getting to the center of the bowl, I can start to feel it kind of catch. Now, I've been doing this long enough. I know what catches feel like. I know what to expect. And I tell myself, okay, I've got to stop with the diamond. I've got to move to the round. The round is less likely to hang like the diamond would. So back in with the round head, working across. I'm remembering where the catch was starting to happen. I get into it once and I'm all right. I get into it twice and the whole world kind of comes apart. The tool caught in the original catch and dragged the tool down beyond its, I guess you kind of have to have some geometry in your mind to really understand this, but it dragged it down beyond tolerances and turned the tool into a projectile, which then proceeded to bounce off of my forehead. So I feel the hit off of my forehead. I feel the days starting to catch in. I hear the tool bounce off of the ceiling, and drop back onto the floor back behind the table where I'm working. And as I'm trying to get my wits back around me, I look down, and my poor beautiful bowl, it clearly, even though it's still spinning at high speed, I can see clearly that at least half of it is now completely gone.
Oh no.
So my wife got a couch for Christmas.
A two-chambered bowl. That actually reminds me of a story. So I'm not a woodworker by any means. I'm a very amateur. Sometimes I like to mess around with wood. And I had read about resin pouring, where you make like resin pours on wood and they stick together, and then you can do different stuff with them. And my thought was I was going to make a lamp. I would make half of it clear and half of it wood, and then run a light up through the top, and it would make a lamp.
Mm-hmm.
So I poured the resin. Everything was, the first time it was a disaster, but I finally, the first 3 or 4 times, I finally got it to set properly and everything. I don't even know if I was using the right stuff, to be honest with you. And I stick it, my idea is I'm going to put it in my my miter saw and cut it up so that way all the edges are flat, and then I'll be able to sand them down. Well, I stuck that thing and I brought the arm down to cut it, and the thing shot. I mean, it not only did it explode, the resin like just completely exploded everywhere, sending shrapnel all over the place. I don't know how I even have my eyes anymore because I wasn't wearing glasses. And the piece of wood shot maybe like 30 feet. Luckily, I was outside. I probably would have put a hole in my wall. I shot like 30 feet out into the woods in my backyard. I still haven't found it. I heard it. I watched it go and saw it crash, but I never found the thing.
Yep.
So obviously, I don't want to be embarrassed when my wife gets home. So I'm like frantically cleaning up all these shards of broken acrylic, or not acrylic, resin. I have honestly no idea what happened. It was the last time I will ever mess with that stuff. But it's amazing how dangerous these tools can get when they're in the hands of people like me.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'll stick with trucks.
Yeah. Well, even those of us who have been working at it for a while still, yeah, every now and again something still goes wrong.
Keeps the game exciting, right?
That's right. That's right. As long as I keep all my fingers, I'm happy.
So we referenced it a couple times, but I got to ask about your Miata.
Mm-hmm.
So now you come from the great state of Oregon, so you're definitely in America, and you have a Miata with all of the steering wheel and pedals on the right-hand side. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's actually called a Eunos Roadster. In Japan, they had a sub-brand called Eunos, which is very much like Lexus to Toyota. And so they produced, of course, they had the Miata there just as much as they had it here. They just called it something different there. And yeah, I was shopping for cars. I had this really awful little Accord that I was driving and sold it unbeknownst to my wife. And,
actually, you referred to it. We had talked a little bit before, and you referred to it perfectly as, the beige. What did you call it?
So to be fair, it was baby blue. It was actually very pretty, but it was about as beige of a car as you can get, which, but by saying beige, when you think beige, you think the most boring thing you could possibly think of, and it's probably beige. So I was doing some shopping, and I was driving my wife completely bonkers because I needed a car, and she didn't care because I still had the old pickup. And every time I'd show her a car, she'd say either, "Oh, I don't like it," or "Oh, it's too expensive," or "Why in the world would you ever want to be seen in that?" That was one of her favorites. And then I come across this little yellow Eunos that was for sale. And I showed it to her, and in my mind, I'm thinking she's going to go, no, not a chance in hell. We'd talked about Miatas before, and there's a lot of stigma with Miatas. You either have to wear a man bun or you know, have different preferences when it comes to boys and girls in order to drive a Miata. And so I assumed that she would say, no way, you can't have that. Well, I showed her a picture of the little yellow Eunos, and she goes, oh my gosh, can we have that? And I said, yes, we sure can. And so we went up and met the guy that was selling it and picked it up about a week later. And I'm actually still really good friends with the guy I bought it from. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's a really fun little car.
Have you run into any others like it out in Oregon? Because I'm trying to think. I don't actually believe I've ever seen a right-handed car like that on the road before, other than like a mail truck.
Sure. So there's a 25-year rule in the U.S. regarding imports. They have to be at least 25 years old to bypass safety regulations in the U.S. So once a car becomes 25 years old, it's now legal to import, regardless of its safety standings. Now, the car may be perfectly safe. It's just not registered with us. So now that we're past the 25-year mark for cars like that, we're seeing a really big boom in right-hand drive cars, because all of a sudden now the original Mitsubishi Evolutions are available, the Skylines are available, some of the Miatas are becoming available, and all of these are really, really highly desirable cars in the enthusiast scenes, I guess. And so you don't see very many right-hand drive Miatas, because you can buy a regular left-hand drive Miata in the States for about half the price. So, so why would you? But
I'll show you. I'll spend double the amount of money that I would normally spend.
In this case, he was asking a pretty reasonable price tag for it, and the car itself actually is extremely unique. It's called a J Limited. It's painted in sunburst yellow, and it's one of only 800 that were ever produced in the world, and the first of only 2 in the U.S. So,
wow, that's a pretty cool claim to fame,
yeah.
actually.
It made it worth it for me to spend a little bit more money than I would have on a U.S. Miata.
And I'm sure that it's probably, since your niche is so specific, it's probably helped you get a little bit of attention for form function wood.
Yeah, it's been pretty fantastic. And the Miata groups, the people who own Miatas, they tend to be really fantastic people. I think that's fair across most automotive people. So, you show up and you've got a car that they've all got and they all love, and then you also say, hey, I can make something really cool for your little car and make it, really unique, because, well, there's well over 1 million Miatas on the road, and being unique is a little bit tricky. So, yeah, it's being able to do something that really makes them stand out, has been, I think, really helpful for me.
Would you say the Miata crowd is your biggest buyers?
By far, yeah. To be fair, because I have it out here in the driveway and I can build for it directly, I was much more confident starting with the Miata guys, because I knew that I could sell a product that when they put it in their car, it was going to fit flawlessly. And then as things have progressed, of course, I've expanded greatly. I've done Nissans and Hondas and a couple of Fords, and as it expands, you kind of know the questions to ask and the measurements that you're going to need, and able to progress from there. But starting in the Miata crew and being able to build directly for a car that I could go out and test fit the stuff in, that was huge. It was very helpful in getting things started.
So what kind of questions would you ask if you didn't know or like what kind of information would you need to put into the knobs?
So for the most part, the only thing I really need from the customers is one very specific measurement, and that's when you take the shift knob off, you leave a section of the shift arm exposed above the shift boot. And I always need to know exactly what that length is, because then I can build the knob so that when you screw it screws on right down against the shift boot, and then you don't have any weird gaps, and really makes for a really clean install, which, as far as I'm concerned, allows me to create a better product for my customers, because the cookie cutter stuff that you can buy, the ways that they make it possible for you to do the same fitting, they use what I consider to be very cheesy stuff. They, just a tube that you run Allen screws through, and they kind of pinch. And I don't know if you've ever bought a $10 AutoZone shift knob, but inevitably they start to spin and they kind of fall off. And this way I'm able to build something that screws on just like the factory knob does, sits just like the factory knob does, and holds on just like the factory knob does. It doesn't back off. It doesn't fall off. So
with the knob, with the length of that, have you found that varies a lot from car to car, or does it pretty much stay standard?
It varies from model to model. So I can do any NA Miata, first generation Miata, sorry. I can do that off of the same formula over and over and over again. And through fortunate circumstance of Miata building, Mazda building things on a similar platform for so long, I can actually translate that through almost every generation of the Miata, fortunately. However, when you start to go to Toyotas or Fords or Mitsubishis, that kind of thing, each one of them is going to have a different, they've built the cars differently. The arms are different lengths, the boots are different lengths. And so you end up finding that they're all, if you put two 350Zs side by side, they're both going to have the same measurements. But if you put a 350Z next to a Porsche 911, they're going to be very different.
It's weird how something so small, so it's such a small detail that most people would probably never even think of as such a crucial part of your business.
Yeah, it's, for me, I've spent so much time, I've shopped, I've purchased so many cookie cutter knobs that, I thought they were really cool until I lived with them for a while, and then it started to nag at me. It's like, okay, this one's screwed down and it stays put, but all of a sudden I've got an inch space where I can see the ugly old raw shift arm between the bottom of the knob and the top of the boot. Or like I mentioned before, it's got one of the cheesy mounting things, and all of a sudden I'm hard through the middle of an autocross course and I'm going for a 2-3 shift, and I hit third gear and the knob flies off and lands somewhere else in the car. So for me, it's, so much stuff in this day and age is built to get it out there, to put it out there as quick as possible, to make as much money as possible, and damn the circumstances and the consequences. And, being small like I am and doing this essentially as a hobby like I am, I am able to provide a product that is just a little bit more than you're going to find anywhere else, but at a substantially smaller price tag, because I do go to work, I do pay the bills somewhere else. So, eventually would I like it to be lucrative enough to do full time? Yeah, absolutely. But for now, I'm really just enjoying getting the product out there and interacting with the people.
I think there's always definitely a market for that thing that's just a little bit better than, or in your case, probably much, much better than kind of that cookie cutter AutoZone, product that you can buy. I know that us at the shop, one of the big things that set us apart from the other shops in our area is that we actually do try. I mean, it's weird that in an industry like mine, the way to set yourself apart is to care about what you're putting out, essentially.
Yep.
People have mentioned to us before when we get people, new employees and stuff who have maybe worked at other shops, the attitude is always, oh, it's just a truck, right? It's just a work truck. But if you ask the guy who just spent, $200,000 buying that work truck, if he wants his paint to look good, I would be willing to bet you that he's going to say yes.
Absolutely.
So it's amazing to me, at least from that perspective, to see other people out there who are trying to put their best foot forward and put that out into the world instead of just let's get this out and make some money.
Yeah. Yep. It's immensely important to take pride in what you do, and I think that's kind of gotten lost over the last couple of decades. It's still there in people like you and me, people who are striving, but it's become such a throwaway society that, we don't care. Oh, it broke, whatever. I'll just buy a new one.
I think I've definitely sensed a shift going back in the other direction. Even in just my own personal experience buying and sell, I always try to, maybe before I didn't care so much. I always was just looking for the cheapest price. But now, as I get older, I notice that quality matters a lot more to me than price does, or at least more than it used to.
Yeah. I think we're learning again after a short hiatus that sometimes it is cheaper in the long run to pay more now. Buy something a little nicer now and you won't have to replace it in 6 months.
Exactly. So one of my favorite questions to ask people, well, not all people, but people like you who create things, Enzo Ferrari, he collected all of his failures and he put them all into one place in his factory that he called the Hall of Horrors. And he actually had all of his meetings there. So that way, if someone made a mistake, there was no excuse to make it ever again, because you had all of these examples around you all the time of all the mistakes that any Ferrari had ever failed. Do you have anything like that at your shop, or is there any times when maybe you made something and you were expecting it to come out one way, but it just went the complete opposite direction?
Yeah, so I love that story. I had no idea. Being an enthusiast, I'm surprised I had no idea he had a Hall of Horrors. I have what I call the graveyard. It stares me in the face from the top of my shelf, and it's everything that has ever gone wrong from beginning to end, including the multiple pieces that have come off the lathe at high speed and either hit me in the face or bounced off of a wall. Or catches that, and when I say catch, it's like with the cherry bowl where the tool stops and flings itself, and catches that have gone too deep to bring the piece back, and finishes that didn't work, and all of those hard-learned lessons, much like Enzo, that if I have them in front of me, they're a reminder of, don't do that, stupid.
Are there any particular that stand out to you when you're working?
Well, probably mostly the first one that came off the lathe and smacked me in the face. It was a very unassuming, very non-threatening piece of maple that I learned firmly had a vendetta for me. The original lathe that I described to you, my $100 deal, not a deal. The piece of wood was literally just pinched in the lathe. Nothing actually held the piece of wood. I now have a very nice clamp that goes onto the headstock that actually physically holds the piece of wood to the lathe. But initially it was just a pinch between the head and the tail of the lathe, and you put pressure on it, and that's what held it in place. Well, as you can imagine, it's not real effective when everything stops all at once. Something has to go. So working along the rest and kind of starting to see the shape that I was looking for and getting kind of excited, but I was really new. That was probably only my third or fourth piece that I'd ever even turned. And this particular piece of maple that I was working with was actually pretty soft, which is actually kind of problematic on the lathe. It's a lot easier to make mistakes on soft woods than it is on hardwoods. And moving along and trying to use a tool that I don't even use anymore. I've forgotten the name of it. I loathe it entirely. If you watch any people who work on a wood lathe under normal circumstances, they use this tool religiously. It's like their go-to tool, and I refuse to pick it up, and I've forgotten its name. But it's just a real flat edge, and it's a beveled edge, like a bologna cut. And you're supposed to be able to run that thing along the barrel of whatever you're working on. And it's supposed to give you a really nice, really smooth finish. It's supposed to take out all the little fibers that normally kind of hang out before you sand. And it does that really well if you know how to use it. When you don't know how to use it, both ends of that flat piece are pointy and sharp. And if you get them just wrong, they dig into the wood and all hell breaks loose. And so that's what happened. Just inexperienced and coming back across the piece and trying to pay attention, and got off just enough that corner hung up and chucked the piece off the lathe. And I actually held on to the tool that time. So I guess it was a reverse of the cherry bowl incident.
Well, hopefully you at least didn't have to go to the hospital or anything.
No. Nothing's been bad enough yet to... I don't even think it bruised. It just woke me up.
Concussed you a little bit.
Yep.
So what does the actual process look like from start to finish? And you don't have to go into super detail on this. Just kind of like a general overview of like what it looks like from concept to completion.
Sure.
But if you want to go into detail, feel free. I don't know how long of a process. I don't want you to feel like you have to talk about it for.
It's okay. We'll be
2 hours.
Here for the next 6.5 hours. No.
All right. I'm just gonna lean back. You just start talking.
No, the abridged version. It starts, if it's wood, it starts with a 2x2 by. Depending on if I'm making a knob or an e-brake handle, knobs typically start with a 5-inch long piece of wood. The e-brake handles typically start with a 6-inch piece of wood, 7-inch piece of wood. Chuck that up on the lathe, get everything centered, and make sure it's going to rotate smoothly. And then basically you just start working into it. And the first thing I always do is get the piece down to a nice smooth cylinder. Get all the edges off, make sure that I'm down into one nice round piece of wood. And then from that point, it's either working from an image that the customer has given me, the image that's in my head, or like I said, sometimes I'll just start digging at it and see what happens. But cut out the shape that you're looking for. And then once you have the shape, it has a tail on both ends of the original piece of wood or acrylic or whatever you're working with. I'll cut off the tail end so that it's the smooth, what's actually the bottom of the shift knob at that point. Cut that off, leave the bottom of the shift knob exposed, and then depending on the vehicle and what size threads it takes and that kind of thing, use that specific drill bit to drill into the depth that I've measured and the size that I need for the threaded fitting. Once that's done, then I'll cut it off of the lathe from the top end, glue in that insert for the vehicle, and then I can actually turn the whole piece around on the lathe. I can chuck up a bolt into the head of the lathe and turn the whole piece around, and then I can work the top of the knob into whatever shape I want. Once that's done, it goes into the epoxy booth, which was a huge, huge learning curve. You can ask me about that if you want to. You don't have to.
No, I won't.
And it starts depending on if it's just a wooden knob or if they want a shift pattern or a particular image, any of those kinds of things. If it's just a standard raw shift knob, it gets 2 coats, sometimes 3 coats of 2-part epoxy, kind of like the stuff you were talking about that exploded on you.
Not running through the saw.
Not running through the saw. Nope. We're beyond the saw at this point. And so I actually just dip the piece in the 2-part epoxy while it's still fluid. Allow that to stand and cure. And then if it's getting any kind of imagery, a shift pattern, a decal, I don't know, a manufacturer's logo, whatever the customer is after, at that point, I'll apply that to it and then trap that underneath a couple more coats of epoxy. And then that's essentially the process. There's a little bit of cleanup. The resin drops off at the bottom and leaves little drips and stuff like that. You clean that off. But I don't do anything else to the resin once it's cured. It cures glassy, glossy, smooth, and clear. Worst case scenario, if I've got a lot of fingerprints on it, I'll use a little bit of glass cleaner and polish it back up. That's about it.
And how long does the process take from start to finish?
So I can typically create the actual piece with the lathe, honestly, just within a couple of hours. It always gets customers really, really excited because I'll show them a picture of the piece of wood going on the lathe, and then I'll send them another picture a couple hours later, and it looks like a shift knob, and they're like, "Oh, it's going to be mine tomorrow." I was like, "Well, no, not quite." The epoxy portion of it, each coat, it goes on. I usually do them in the evening, and then it can take up to 2 days for that to cure. And then I'll put it back on the lathe. I'll scuff it just a little bit so that the next coat has something really solid to grab into. Just kind of like you do with painting. You always scuff the layer below enough that you know it's going to grab. And then dip until I'm satisfied with the quality of the finish. But each one of those taking a couple of days. If I do 3 coats, you're talking about a week. If I do a decal and need an additional 3 coats, well, now you're talking about 2 weeks.
Right.
And that's not really any skin off of my teeth. It doesn't take any real time for me to do that, but it does really drag the process out.
Do you have multiple knobs going at one time?
Oh, yeah. So today is not really a special day. I think I've only got 3 or 4 knobs in total. 3 knobs in there in total. But I've had as many as 8 of them going at the same time, just depending on what's going on. And that's definitely gets a little, it's a lot to keep up with that many pieces that are starting to kick off all at once. And especially on the first 1 or 2 coats, the wood itself traps air. And so when you dip it in the epoxy, that air tries to escape. And so you've got bubbles that form in the epoxy. So you're chasing those with a heat gun. You're chasing 360 degrees of 8 knobs all at the same time. It gets pretty hectic.
I would forget which ones I dipped and which ones I didn't. I don't know how you.
So
oh, that's great.
I purposefully do them in, I guess, what I would call runs or additions. So I will build 6, 7, 8 knobs, and then I will have one dip event where I will do all of those knobs all at once. I don't have to remember what is or isn't done or where it is in the process.
See, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's the only way.
I thought to do that until the 7th or 8th time I messed it up.
Right.
If you could get one of your knobs in any person's car, whose would it be and why?
Good question. Caught unawares, caught off guard. Let's see. Hell, honestly, if I could get anything, if I could just get Chip Foose to notice me, I would probably die a happy man, much less get something actually in one of his vehicles. And anybody who knows anything about the automotive world, especially the hot rodding world, knows that Chip Foose is one of the leading minds in customizing hot rods and building really one-off classic cars. And so to see a piece of my work in one of his one-off customs would be, I'd be pretty stoked.
Unfortunately, the only person who's probably going to listen to this is my mom. So I don't think she knows Chip Foose. So I'm probably not going to be able to make that happen, but I definitely hope it does happen for you at some time.
Hi, Mom. Yeah, that would be pretty epic.
So that's all the questions I have for you today. Where can people find your work?
So probably the easiest place to get a hold of me is if you've got Instagram, just at Form Function Wood, and that's all one word. No spaces, no slashes, no anything fancy. At Form Function Wood. It's a little bit trickier to find on Facebook. It is form/function/wood in the search bar. And that's also pretty good resource for seeing my work and getting in contact with me.
I can tell you from experience that you answer very quickly on Instagram.
Yes. That kind of falls in line with that offering something that a lot of people don't offer. If I am in bed and mostly asleep, I probably won't answer, but I do say probably. Otherwise, I will answer.
Well, thank you very much for coming on today, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun.
And I hope you have a wonderful night.
Thanks, man. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen today. If you'd like to learn more about Mike and Form Function Wood, you can find him on Instagram at Form Function Wood. If you would like to learn more about A1 Autobody and what it is that we do here, you can find us on Instagram at A1 Autobody NH. Feel free to shoot us a DM and let us know what you thought of the podcast. I'd really like some feedback, so don't be afraid to be critical. I would like to hear it. We're trying to create something that you guys can enjoy and that we enjoy making. So I would be very interested to hear what everybody thinks. Thank you again, and this is A1 Autobody signing off.